The road stretched long and empty, a black ribbon cutting through the Texas night. The glow of streetlights flickered against damp pavement, their reflections dancing in the distance. It was late, just past 11. The kind of hour when most people had long since gone home, where the only ones left on the road were night shift workers, truckers hauling freight, and the occasional weary traveler. Lieutenant Commander Jordan Ellis was one of them. She had been driving for nearly 2 hours, her fingers tapping idly against the steering wheel, keeping time with the slow, melodic hum of an old jazz tune whispering through the speakers. She wasn't in uniform, just a simple black sweater, a pair of jeans, hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. To any passing glance, she was just another driver on the road. Just another person heading home. Or so she thought. The sudden burst of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror sent a ripple of tension down her spine. Not fear. Never fear, but something close to exhaustion. She had been here before. Jordan let out a slow breath, signaled, and eased her car onto the shoulder. The gravel crunched under her tires as she put it in park. Then, with the same practiced discipline that had been drilled into her for years, she kept both hands on the wheel, visible, steady, controlled. The patrol car pulled in behind her, idling for a long moment before the driver's side door creaked open. The man who stepped out moved with the confidence of someone who expected obedience, his heavy boots scuffed against the asphalt, one hand resting lazily on his belt, the other gripping a flashlight that flicked on as he approached. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the side of Jordan's face. She turned her head slightly, catching his reflection in the mirror. Sergeant Cole Turner. She didn't know him, but she knew men like him. His voice came sharp and impatient. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation. Jordan exhaled through her nose, slow and measured, before reaching for the glove compartment. Was I speeding, officer? She asked, her tone even. Turner didn't answer right away. Instead, he took the papers from her hand, holding them just out of reach as he gave her car a once-over. Tail lights out. Jordan frowned. That wasn't right. That can't be. Turner's eyes snapped to hers. And in that moment, she felt the air shift. That quiet, unspoken moment where power meets resistance and one side expects the other to cave. For a moment, there was only silence. The kind that stretched too long, thick with the weight of unspoken tension. Jordan kept her expression neutral, her fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel. She had spent enough years in the military to recognize a power play when she saw one. Turner finally spoke, his voice flat. Are you arguing with me? She met his gaze through the side mirror, measured, calm. I'm just saying my taillights were checked a few weeks ago, she replied, careful to keep her tone even. But if there's an issue, I can get it fixed. Turner scoffed, shaking his head. Step out of the car. The command came sharp. No hesitation. Jordan hesitated. Not out of fear, but calculation. There was no one around, no traffic, no witnesses. Her heartbeat remained steady, but she was acutely aware of the moment she was in, the kind she had trained for, the kind she had been warned about. Mind telling me why? She asked, her voice steady. Turner tilted his head, the corners of his mouth tugging into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but held the same condescension. Because I said so. Jordan let that sit in the air for a second before she exhaled slowly. Then, with deliberate, controlled movements, she unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed open the door. The night air was cool against her skin as she stepped out onto the asphalt, standing tall, her shoulders squared. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she wouldn't be bullied either. Turner took a step back, scanning her, sizing her up. Turn around, hands on the car. This time, she didn't move. For what reason? Turner's smirk vanished. His fingers twitched near his belt. Are you resisting? Jordan didn't blink. No, I'm asking a question. There it was again, that flicker of something in his expression. Annoyance. Amusement. Maybe both. And then, without warning, he reached for his radio. Got a non-compliant driver here, he muttered into the speaker. Then louder. Turn around. Her pulse picked up slightly, but her breathing stayed even. Officer, the first need you to understand something, she said, her voice low but firm. I know exactly what I'm allowed to do, and I know exactly what you can't do. Turner's jaw tensed. You're under arrest, he snapped. His hand shot out toward her wrist. Jordan moved before he could grab her, stepping back just enough to avoid his grip. Under arrest for what? Turner didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his cuffs. For obstructing an officer. Jordan exhaled sharply through her nose. So that was his game. Her military training kicked in. Heartbeat steady, breathing controlled. She had two choices. Comply, and fight this later. Or push back and risk escalation. She wasn't about to become another statistic. With slow, deliberate movements, she turned, placing her hands on the roof of her car. The metal was cool against her palms. Turner wasted no time. He yanked her arms behind her back, the cuffs biting into her skin too tight, deliberately tight before shoving her forward. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured. Turner chuckled, his grip tightening. "Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing." But he didn't. Not even close. The hard plastic seat of the patrol car pressed against her back, as Turner shoved her inside, slamming the door shut behind her. Jordan sat still, her wrists burning against the metal cuffs, her breath measured. Outside, Turner strutted back to his vehicle, muttering something into his radio. She glanced at the partition separating her from the front seat. Her own reflection stared back, calms composed. But beneath that, something simmered. She had been through combat drills, high-stakes operations, interrogations in foreign territories. But this was different. This was a man with a badge. Drunk on power, convinced he was untouchable. Jordan settled back against the seat, the red and blue lights flashing against the window. Turner thought he had won. He had no idea. The holding cell was small, cold, and reeked of old sweat and stale coffee. The metal bench beneath Jordan was hard and unforgiving, pressing into her spine as she shifted slightly, rolling her shoulders to ease the stiffness creeping in. She had been in worse places. Wartime outposts, makeshift barracks in foreign deserts. She had spent nights in situations where discomfort wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a matter of survival. This was nothing. But that didn't mean she wasn't angry. Through the bars, she could hear the faint murmur of officers talking at the front desk, the occasional shuffle of paperwork, the distant clatter of a coffee cup hitting a counter. Jordan sat still, her wrists resting lightly on her lap, her breath slow and measured. Control your breathing. Control your mind. Basic training. Second nature. Then came the footsteps. Heavy. Purposeful. Arrogant. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Sergeant Cole Turner appeared in front of the cell a second later, arms crossed over his chest, that same smug smirk plastered across his face. "Comfy?" Jordan didn't answer. He tilted his head, stepping closer to the bars. "You know," he mused, "if you'd just played along, you wouldn't be in here right now." She let a slow, deliberate smile curl at the edges of her lips. "Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be." For a split second, his smirk faltered. Just barely. A flicker of something in his eyes, annoyance? Uncertainty? He covered it up fast, scoffing as he glanced toward the empty holding area. "No one's coming to get you tonight, lady," he shrugged. "Guess that means you'll have some time to think about that attitude." Jordan just watched him. Unmoved. Unshaken. Turner leaned in slightly, his voice dropping lower. "See, here's the thing," he continued. "People like you think the rules don't apply. You think a little confidence is enough to get out of trouble." Jordan let him talk. Let him ramble. It didn't matter. Because he didn't know what was coming. And then, as if on cue, another officer approached from the hallway. A younger guy, probably late 20s, dressed in a standard issue uniform. He stopped a few feet away, a clipboard tucked under one arm. He looked uneasy. Sergeant?" The younger officer's voice carried just a hint of hesitation. Turner barely glanced at him. "What?" The officer shifted his weight, glancing at Jordan before clearing his throat. "We got a call." Turner waved a hand dismissively. "So? Handle it." The younger officer hesitated. "I think you need to see this." Jordan watched the shift in Turner's posture, the tightening of his jaw. He turned to her one last time, as if trying to reassert whatever dominance he thought he had. Then, without another word, he followed the officer down the hallway. She sat back against the cold wall of her cell, exhaling slowly. It wouldn't be long now, and when the truth came out, Turner was going to regret every single decision that led him here. Jordan sat on the cold metal bench, her back straight, hands resting on her lap. The cell smelled of disinfectant and old regret, a place where time moved slowly, designed to make people feel small. She wasn't small. She had spent nights in war zones, had made decisions that carried weight far greater than this. She had faced real threats. Sergeant Turner? He was nothing more than a man with a badge and a fragile ego. And that ego was about to take a hit. She listened, her trained ears catching the sounds beyond the bars. Muffled voices. The shuffle of boots. The distinct buzz of a desk phone being picked up. Then, a pause. Not the casual kind. The kind that carried weight. She could picture it, the officer at the front desk, probably mid-sentence, stopping cold as the voice on the other end changed the temperature of the room. She smirked. There it is. The moment when power begins to shift. A door opened down the hall. Heavy footsteps. Turner stormed back in. His jaw tight, his entire body a coil of irritation. Jordan met his gaze through the bars, calm as ever. What the hell did you do? He demanded. She tilted her head slightly. I didn't do anything. His nostrils flared. People talk, she continued. And some of us have friends in very high places. Turner's lips pressed into a thin line, his hands curling into fists at his sides. That smug arrogance from earlier, gone. Now. He looked like a man trying to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. Another officer, the young one from earlier, appeared at the doorframe. He hesitated before speaking. Sergeant. The captain wants to see you. Now. Turner's eyes stayed locked on Jordan for a long beat. She didn't blink. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed off. 15 minutes passed. Jordan remained where she was, patient, composed. Then came more footsteps, quick, urgent. The young officer returned, this time with a set of keys in hand. Ma'am, he started, noticeably more respectful than before, we're releasing you. Jordan exhaled through her nose, slow and controlled. On what grounds? The officer hesitated, then sighed. A call came in, he admitted. Orders from way above my pay grade. Your arrest was. He cleared his throat. Let's just say it's being reconsidered. Jordan stood as he unlocked the cell. The second she stepped out, the balance of power shifted for good. This wasn't just about her anymore. Turner thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The courthouse was quiet, but not silent. The kind of quiet that held weight where whispered conversations carried an edge. And every footstep seemed just a little too loud against the polished floors. Jordan Ellis sat at the defendant's table, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp. She wasn't wearing an orange jumpsuit, wasn't shackled or cuffed. She was no prisoner. She was here on her terms. Across from her, Sergeant Cole Turner sat stiffly at the prosecution's table. His shoulders squared, jaw tight, his usual arrogance dimmed by something colder, uncertainty. He still thought he could win this. He was wrong. The judge, an older man with a weary expression, Judge George Holloway, adjusted his glasses as he settled into his chair. All right, he sighed, flipping through the case files. Let's get to it. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair, stood first. Your Honor, he began, his voice crisp. We have reason to believe that the defendant, Lieutenant Commander Jordan Ellis, was unlawfully detained without probable cause. Furthermore, we have uncovered a pattern of misconduct involving the arresting officer, Sergeant Cole Turner. A murmur rippled through the room. Turner shifted in his seat. Judge Holloway peered at him over the rim of his glasses. Sergeant Turner, care to explain? Turner cleared his throat, leaning forward. Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop. She refused to follow basic commands, leaving me no choice but to detain her. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. Uncooperative. He turned, lifting a document from the table. Lieutenant Commander Ellis has a distinguished military career. Graduate of the Naval Academy. Multiple commendations. No criminal history. No outstanding citations. Are you telling me that despite all this, she was such a threat that you had to arrest her? Over a broken taillight? Turner opened his mouth, then shut it. The silence stretched. The prosecutor continued, flipping through his papers. Additionally, an internal review of your arrest history shows a disproportionate number of traffic stops involving black drivers in this district. The murmurs grew louder. Turner's face darkened. Judge Holloway set his file down with a sigh. "Sergeant, I don't like what I'm hearing." Turner sat back, crossing his arms. "She resisted," he muttered. The prosecutor smirked. "The body cam footage says otherwise." A ripple of noise moved through the room. Judge Holloway glanced toward the bailiff. "Let's play the footage." A screen lowered at the front of the courtroom. The video began to play. Jordan didn't turn to watch. She had lived it. Turner's voice barked orders. Her own voice. Calm. The unnecessary escalation. The smug way he tightened the cuffs. The way he smirked when he shoved her into the back seat. The room was dead silent when the footage ended. Judge Holloway leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Sergeant Turner, you violated protocol. You conducted an unlawful arrest, and you failed to report the full details in your initial statement." Turner opened his mouth, but the judge wasn't done. "The charges against Lieutenant Commander Ellis are hereby dismissed." The gavel came down, sharp and final. "And I strongly suggest an internal investigation into Sergeant Turner's conduct." The tension in the room snapped like a pulled rubber band. Turner looked like he had been punched in the gut. His face flushed red, hands clenched into fists at his sides. Jordan simply exhaled. She never had a doubt. As she stood, collecting her things, she glanced toward Turner one last time. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. They didn't need to be. Because this time she wasn't the one who had to fight for her reputation. Turner was. Sergeant Cole Turner stormed out of the courtroom, his heavy boots slamming against the polished floor. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. His face burned with humiliation, his fists curled at his sides. He could feel the eyes on him, other officers, court staff, even a few reporters who had trickled in after the hearing started. He wasn't used to this. Turner was used to walking into a room and commanding respect. Or fear. Now, he felt something else entirely exposed. And then, the worst part. Sergeant Turner. A sharp voice cut through the hallway noise. He turned. Chief Franklin Moore stood a few feet away, arms crossed over his broad chest, his expression unreadable, stone cold. Moore had been on the force for over 30 years. A man respected across the department. A man whose word carried weight. Turner straightened. "Sir, walk with me," Moore cut him off. Turner swallowed and followed. The second the door to the chief's office shut, the tension in the room tripled. Moore wasted no time. "What the hell were you thinking?" Turner exhaled sharply. "I was doing my job." Moore scoffed. Laughed. A short, bitter sound. Then, without warning, he tossed a file onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. Turner's gut tightened. "That's not what it looks like from here," Moore said coldly. "Body cam footage. Your arrest history. The fact that you didn't even know who you were arresting." Turner's nostrils flared. "What does that have to do with anything?" Moore leaned forward. "Everything." His voice was quiet, but sharp. This wasn't some random woman. This was a high-ranking Navy officer. "You think this is just going to disappear?" Turner looked away, grinding his teeth. "She was disrespectful. She questioned you," Moore interrupted. "That's not a crime." Turner scoffed, shaking his head. "You don't get it. People like that." Moore's expression hardened. "People like what?" Silence. Turner swallowed, but said nothing. Moore sighed and ran a hand down his face. "The DA is reviewing every single one of your cases from the past 5 years." Turner's stomach twisted. "You've been flagged for racial profiling. And you better believe this department isn't going down with you." Turner's hands curled into fists. "What does that mean?" Moore straightened. "It means you're being put on immediate suspension. Effective now." Turner stiffened. "Internal Affairs is investigating. And if they find what I think they're gonna find." Moore shook his head. "Your career is over." The words hit Turner like a punch to the gut. His face burned. "This is bull." Moore held up a hand. Cold. Unyielding. "Don't finish that sentence." A beat of silence. "Pack up your desk. And if I were you?" Moore's voice dropped lower. "I'd get a lawyer." Turner stood there, frozen in place. His world unraveling in real time. And for the first time in his career, he realized he wasn't untouchable. Across town, in a quiet cafe on the corner of a bustling street, Jordan Ellis stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic cup. The smell of fresh brewed espresso lingered in the air, mixing with the distant hum of city life outside. She scrolled through her phone, reading the latest headlines. Sergeant suspended after wrongful arrest of naval officer. Body cam footage exposes pattern of misconduct. Investigation launched into police practices in District 12. She wasn't surprised. She had known from the second Turner threw those cuffs on her that this moment would come. It had to. Because men like him, they never think they'll be held accountable. Until they are. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Rebecca Hayes, her attorney. Turner's been suspended. Could face charges. Jordan took a slow sip of her coffee. Good. She glanced up, watching as the city moved on around her. The world hadn't stopped. People went to work. Parents picked up their kids. Life continued. But for some, this fight wasn't over. Because Turner wasn't an isolated case. He was a symptom of a larger disease. Jordan had seen men like him before, entitled, unchecked, accustomed to bending the law to fit their power. She had seen them overseas in war zones, in bureaucratic offices, in positions where they had just enough authority to think they were invincible. They weren't. And now? Turner knew that too. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a number she recognized. She sighed, then answered. Lieutenant Commander. The familiar voice on the other end was calm, professional. I assume you've seen the news. I have. A brief silence. And how are you feeling? Jordan glanced at her reflection in the cafe window. She saw no signs of defeat, no cracks in her composure. She had won. But this was never just about her. I feel like I did exactly what I was supposed to do, she replied. The voice on the other end softened. That's what I thought you'd say. A pause. The Department of Defense has taken interest in your case. Don't be surprised if they ask you to speak on it. Jordan exhaled through her nose. Not sure I'm interested in being a headline. You already are, the voice countered. And whether you like it or not, what happened to you is a reflection of something bigger. She knew that. She had always known that. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. And it wouldn't be the last. Jordan leaned against the counter, watching the traffic move by outside. This isn't the first time, she said. And it won't be the last. No, the voice agreed. But it's the first time Turner is facing consequences. And it's because you didn't back down. Jordan closed her eyes for a second, letting those words settle. She didn't back down. Not when Turner pulled her over. Not when he tried to intimidate her. Not when the cuffs tightened around her wrists. Not even when she spent the night behind bars, knowing full well the deck had been stacked against her. She had stayed firm, and now, she had won. The voice on the other end cleared their throat. One last thing, they added. You might be getting a call from the mayor's office. Jordan raised an eyebrow. Oh? Seems they want to recognize you for handling the situation with professionalism and grace. She smirked. Now that's ironic. The voice chuckled. You gonna accept it? Jordan thought for a moment, then shrugged. I'll think about it. She ended the call and tucked her phone back into her pocket. Across the street, a mother walked with her young son, his small hand wrapped tightly around hers. He was laughing about something, carefree, full of life. Jordan watched them for a moment. The next generation. She had fought for herself, yes. But she had also fought for him. For every black boy and girl who deserved to grow up in a world where men like Turner couldn't wield their badges like weapons. She took a deep breath. And then she walked away, her steps firm, her purpose clear. Because this fight wasn't just hers. It never had been. Final message, power unchecked is power abused. And the only way to change the system is to hold it accountable. What happened to Jordan happens to people every single day. People who don't have the privilege of rank, connections, or evidence to back them up. That's why it's important to speak up. To demand change. To refuse to stay silent. If this story made you think, share it. If it made you angry, talk about it. And if it made you realize how much work is left to do, stay engaged. Because real change starts with real conversations. Jordan Ellis's story is not just about one wrongful arrest. It's about a system that allows unchecked power to thrive. It's about the courage to stand firm in the face of injustice, even when the odds are stacked against you. For many, especially those who have lived through decades of social and political change, this story is a reminder that progress doesn't come from silence. It comes from action. We've seen it throughout history. When people refuse to back down, When they demand fairness, real change happens. Whether it was the civil rights movement, the fight for women's rights, or the push for greater accountability in law enforcement, change has always started with those who refuse to accept injustice as the norm. As we age, our voices don't lose power, they gain wisdom. We have lived, seen, and experienced more than most. It is our responsibility to pass down the lessons of resilience, of standing for what's right, and of ensuring the next generation lives in a world where justice is not a privilege, but a right for all. Because true freedom isn't just about living without fear, it's about ensuring no one else has to. Jordan's story is a testament to resilience, justice, and the power of speaking up. It reminds us that no one is above the law, and no one is beneath its protection. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can share powerful stories of courage, accountability, and real change.